Let's get to the one thing we know for sure, which is it has now been called Democrats will take control of the Senate, having won every toss-up race except for Georgia, which is going to a runoff in December. Raphael Warnock had the edge in terms of the vote totals, although it was quite close. And so that one will go to a runoff, but it no longer sort of determines control of the Senate. Not to say it doesn't ultimately matter. It does. We'll get to that in just a moment. So let's put this map up on the screen. The New York Times does these maps that I am a little bit obsessed with. Basically, what they show is where and how candidates either outperform Biden or outperform Trump. So leave this up on the screen for a minute. The blue arrows are places where Senate candidates outperformed Biden's performance. So you can see Pennsylvania stands out. Actually, Ohio with Tim Ryan, even though he lost, that stands out. Kentucky, that was a surprising one. Eastern Kentucky in particular, Charles Booker was the Senate candidate there, and I know he spent a lot of time cultivating relationships in Eastern Kentucky, so that was kind of surprising. Missouri as well. Again, these are seats that went to Republicans as expected, but Democrats outperformed. You can see also out west quite a bit. Oregon, you can see Colorado shifted pretty dramatically to the left. California, mixed bag. Arizona, a little bit of movement towards Democrats. And then you look at, there's a lot of red arrows on this map as well. It really gives you a sense of how mixed the results of this election ultimately were and how regional. You can see in the South, actually, from North Carolina, South Carolina, a bit less. Georgia was a little bit more mixed. And Raphael Warnock, like I said, does have the edge, but that one's going to a runoff. But you can see Florida, dramatic shifts to the right. And then you see sort of a shift in Iowa. You see South Dakota. You see a number of other states where you had huge shifts outperforming Trump's performance. So ultimately, Nevada called for Catherine Cortez Masto. Have to give a lot of credit to John Ralston on this one.
He was right.
Who called it right. He was even on election day, as he saw the numbers starting to come in, he was even starting to get a little nervous about his predictions. She narrowly hangs on in the final count. She is able to beat Adam Laxalt there in Nevada and hold on. Arizona also called for Mark Kelly over Blake Masters. We'll get to Blake Masters, who is not being a great actor in this whole situation, but that one has been called as well. And then, of course, we already knew the results of Pennsylvania, which ended up not really being particularly close. And Georgia, as I said, headed to that runoff. So Democrats have a chance to even pick up a seat, which, does it matter? Does it not matter? We saw a good tweet that sort of lays out why it makes a difference between Democrats having 50-50 control with Kamala Harris being the tiebreaker versus actually having 51 seats and having the outright control of the chamber. Let's take a look at that tweet. 3 huge differences, Steve Vladek writes here, between a 50-50 and a 51-49D majority. Number 1, having a majority on each committee versus power sharing and deadlocks requiring discharge petitions. Number 2, no single D senator can hijack or block nominations. And number 3, Ds can have 2 members absent and still be able to hold votes. So still a lot at stake in that Georgia runoff, but it no longer will determine control of the Senate.
Exactly right. Also, 2024 was not looking to be a kind year for Democrats. And so if they have a pickup, of course, you want the margins to be able. You have no idea what the election will look like in 2024. You want as many seats as possible to either lessen or blow or perhaps even keep the majority in 2024.
Let me elaborate on that just to get really specific. John Tester in Montana and Joe Manchin in West Virginia are both up in 2024. Those are very difficult seats to hold. So just looking at those 2 alone, when you look across the map, you realize that's going to be a very tough Senate landscape for Democrats next time around. So if they want to continue to hold the chamber, any margin they can possibly have would be really important.
Exactly. And with power in particular, that one we talked about on the committee, that is much more important than people think. It's one of the things that right now Senate business is really at an all-time low. One of the reasons the only things that the Senate can do right now is actually just confirm judges is because that one, at least in terms of the process from the judicial filibuster and more, they've got it down to basically so that it works perfectly well as long as nobody objects, which is a part of the other issue. However, with legislation, this was causing major problems on Capitol Hill over the last 2 years, so it would be a big impact. But overall, it does show you also that we have now moved away from the expected condition of the next 2 years, which was a total block against the Biden agenda in both the House and the Senate. Now, we'll get to the House, but the Senate, of course, was always like the major firewall. That's where some of the most uncompromising, maybe one member could have held up the entire thing with a slim GOP majority. Now they've basically got it so that, I was explained to me this way, which is that having a deadlock in the House, so we'll get to the House projection, but preview, Republicans look like they very, very slightly will get on. Part of the reasons that's not as, quote, dangerous as having a GOP majority in the Senate is that whenever the times when Boehner was there and he would have a Tea Party revolt, Pelosi would just give him 25, 30 votes to just fund the government. So it was actually easier in order to have 20, 30, or 40 Democrats just cross across the aisle rather than have Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, like hijack the entire caucus. So it's less perilous for Biden for funding the government and many other like routine functions that could have been a real thorn in his side than it would have been if there was a GOP majority in the Senate.
It also seems to me, and maybe you have more insight into this, that, one of the things that Republicans have really broadcast and been very clear about is what they want to use their power for is to launch a whole series of investigations. Hunter Biden is top of the list, Fauci and the COVID response, and they have a whole other sort of laundry list of investigations they want to launch. It seems to me a very different deal if that is just a House affair versus if, the Senate is the more sort of prestigious body, garners more media attention. These are more well-known figures. And so if you have both the House and the Senate sort of on the same page going into these investigations, it also seems like that's a bigger deal versus being able to keep it just to the House GOP majority.
No, you're absolutely correct, which is that the GOP investigations, I mean, we'll all remember Benghazi and how all those worked out. Didn't end up doing a damn thing. I mean, I was skeptical even on the Senate one, but you're right, which is that from the Senate, compelling authority. Of course, the House will continue to have subpoena power, but even with the limited amount that they have, we're going to see how it shakes out committee-wise, et cetera, like who gets placed where and what exactly the purview that they're going to get. But it's going to be a real wild ride, I think, for Kevin McCarthy and for the House of Representatives on the GOP side. On the Democratic side, I think what we can expect is just they are going to confirm every like 27-year-old law student they possibly can to the I would do the same thing if I were them. It's a smart move. They are just going to sit there and confirm judges left and right as long as they possibly can. I wouldn't be shocked if you saw maybe one more Supreme Court retirement or, some Supreme Court retirement or departure in the next 2 years, because who knows where things are going to go. And I think a lot of the justices learned from what happened with RBG and are also looking at what Stephen Breyer did. So on a practical level, it changes a hell of a lot here in D.C. On the debt ceiling as well, they could go ahead and maybe pass that during the lame duck and effectively take it off the table for the next 2 years. Even if they didn't, they have a little bit more of wiggle room. But many of the GOP bargaining chips, which were on the table to try and force the Biden hand, caused some more chaos in the lead up to the 2024 election. That's just off the table in a very, very big way. It's just stunning. It's stunning to see this happen.
They also, I mean, they really thought they were going to come into, they being Republicans, going to come into this next Congress with a kind of a mandate for the American people where, their view of the universe and their legislative priorities and their particular culture war issues, where they were going to be able to say, look, the American people affirm they are with us on all of these issues. And also on economics, they thought they were going to be able to come in saying, look, the American people has repudiated the big spending of the Biden administration. Now is time to tighten the purse strings. That was going to be the justification for a potential debt ceiling crisis. That mandate is certainly not there. Now, Republicans have often acted in lots of ways without really having a public mandate. They're a lot more comfortable doing that, I think, ultimately, than Democrats. But the bottom line here is with what looks almost certainly to be divided government, the Republican slim majority in the House, Democratic slim majority in the Senate, and of course, a Democratic president. Unless they find some issues of actual bipartisan cooperation, there ain't shit getting done in this town.
That's correct.
And I'm skeptical that they are going to continue to, they had a couple things where on the minor gun reform legislation they passed, they were able to get some Republicans to go on along with that. The CHIPS Act as well. The infrastructure bill also had Republican support. So there were a few significant items in the first 2 years of Biden's term that they got some Republican support for. I have a feeling we're not going to see them willing to go along anymore, because one of the narratives that's coming out of some corners of the GOP after a, less than spectacular showing in the midterms is that they actually gave in to Biden too much. Now, I don't agree with that assessment, but I see that analysis coming from all kinds of corners at this point. So especially as you get closer to 2024, even on areas that, in theory, there is agreement. Like there is some agreement on potential tech legislation that you could see. There is some agreement on potential additional industrial policy that you could see. Are they going to actually go along with Biden and give him any wins in this next 2-year period? I'm pretty skeptical of that. What do you think?
I completely agree, especially because I think it's completely underscored with the gun legislation. Most of the GOP members who signed on to that were retiring, or they were in extremely safe seats. Well, those people are going to be retired. They're going to be gone. So the Pat Toomey's of the world, the Rob Portmans of the world, they, no longer face a political price. Part of the reason they were willing to take that risk.
Yeah.
The newer crop, they're not going to do that at all.
On the other hand, there are some new Republicans in New York who just won in seats that Biden carried.
Oh, in the House.
Yeah,
right.
in the House by a couple. Some of those seats Biden carried by double digits.
Yeah.
So in the House, there will be a few new moderate members who have some incentive to show that they're willing to work with the Democrats. But ultimately, if you've got Speaker McCarthy controlling what comes to the floor, it doesn't make much of a difference.
And that's I think the point that should be underscored.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.